Hey nerdy knitters, Tanya here. It's time for our monthly knit and chat where we settle in with our favorite beverage and our knitting, chat about something knitting related. And this month's topic is all about saving money and budgeting. Now, it's definitely possible to save money on knitting. You can find lots of inexpensive yarn at pretty much any big box store, Walmart, Michael's, any store like that where you can buy yarn. And knitting patterns, you can find plenty of them for free. I bet you could knit for the rest of your life with just free patterns if you wanted to. But sometimes you want that special hand-dyed yarn that you can't find at a big box store, or you want that new pattern from that designer that you just love, her design aesthetic. And those things, of course, are going to cost a little more money than yarn from Walmart or Michael's and free patterns that you find online. So I decided to just ask you. I asked other knitters how they save money and how they budget for their knitting patterns, their yarn, their notions, all of those things. And I did have a video about this maybe a year or so, maybe 2 years ago. I'll link that here too if you want to watch that. And that was tips that I found myself. But this time I decided to ask you. So I posted on the community tab and I asked, how do you save money on knitting, on your patterns, on your yarn, your notions, all of that? And you guys really came through with some fabulous tips and advice. So we're going to share all of that advice in this video and chat about the ways we can save money, because I know right now especially that the budget is probably tight and other things have to come first, and knitting might be pushed down on that list of possible things to spend money on. So if there's ways to save money on it, then all the better, so we can still enjoy our knitting and save money too. Now, this first group of tips that you left focus on ways to look for sales and deals, like this comment from Masuga, where she talks about signing up for emails from the companies that you love, but then she also mentions patience and waiting for a sale. And I really love that comment, because sometimes that's the best way to save money, is if you know there's a certain thing that you would love to buy and you know that there might be sales coming up for that thing, then you just wait, exercise a little patience, wait for that sale so you can get a good deal on that thing. Now, Amy left a similar comment about subscribing to email lists for the yarn companies and the designers that you really like, because you'll often get like maybe a free pattern when you sign up, or sometimes you'll get a discount code that you can use on any of their designs, and that's a good way to get something that you've been eyeing just by signing up for an email. And you'll often hear about upcoming pattern releases. You'll get a discount code often, or like a special preview or something like that, or if there's a sale, then the lists are usually the first place that you'll hear about those things. And for yarn companies as well, especially like smaller hand-dyed small companies like that, like you can follow them on social media, but email is a great way to know first when there is going to be like a new yarn or a new pattern or anything like that. So definitely start signing up for emails. You could even set up one email on Gmail that is just for things like that, for your favorite yarn companies or designers, and that email is just for those kinds of things. If you don't want it all cluttered up in your regular email inbox, then just set up another email just for those things. Now, along with those companies, some of the larger companies also have bonus points, like Church Mouse Yarns. They have their mouse points, where as you purchase things, you can earn points towards future purchases. And this comment from Kelly, she does the same thing on hobby.com. Sometimes the wait might be a long time for shipping, but she can rack up points, and those points can be traded for patterns and tools and during seasonal sales and things like that. So that's also another great thing to look for, is those companies that offer bonus perks like that. So even when you are spending money, you can get extra points to spend on future purchases as well. Now, another great place to find those sales and deals is Etsy. She talks about unraveling thrifted sweaters, which is another great way to get some really great fibers very inexpensively. But then she has had luck finding hand-dyed yarn on Etsy by searching for oopsie or imperfect dye lots. So if you like certain hand dyers, then follow them on social media, on their email. Keep an eye on their Etsy shop because they might sell those imperfect dye lots. Like if they dyed something up and they were testing or it didn't come out the way that it was supposed to, then they might be selling those at a heavy discount. And if you like the colors, then that's a great way to save even more money on hand-dyed yarn. And another great place to look for things is eBay, like this comment from Kaz, where she said that she found her circular knitting needles on eBay. That is a great place to look for things as well. You can find patterns on there, lots of knitting needles, and I'm sure you can find yarn as well. I've never searched for it, but you'll probably be able to find some on there. And then if you're looking for local deals, like Stick With It Knit and Crochet says that you can look at local thrift shops. I really like looking at thrift shops for sweaters and reclaiming the yarn. I've done that a few times. It's a big process, but when you find a really nice fiber, I found a 100% cashmere sweater. So I had a whole sweater's worth of cashmere yarn that I used to knit a hat and some mittens, and they were just lovely. It was just beautiful, beautiful yarn. So it's worth checking out secondhand stores for sweaters that you can reclaim the yarn for. Or you can also find plenty of yarn at secondhand stores as well. I know that I found a couple skeins of drops, alpaca silk, and some other ones that you don't usually see around here locally where I live, but it was really nice to find them at the secondhand store. And of course, you'll find lots of acrylics and things that you'll find at any big box store as well, but it's worth diving through the bins and the bags to see if you can find a really nice gem of yarn in those piles at the thrift store. Then there was another comment from M. Lawson about looking at high-end thrift stores and estate sales, where you might find even more of that luxury fibers at places like that. Like she was able to get Malabrigo and Barocco for about $1 each, and a sweater quantity of mohair at an estate sale. And then she also mentioned guilds will sometimes have fundraisers and members can donate for that cause, so you can always get good deals on patterns and books and yarn there as well. So it's a really great tip to check out estate sales and knitting guilds as well. We've got more comments coming up where people talk about that. So it's worth checking out your local guild. I don't have one here in the town that I live in, but the town closest to me, that is much larger, they have a guild, but it's a bit of a drive from here. So I haven't joined, but it'd be nice to have one close and handy. But if you have a guild that's local to you, it's definitely worth checking out. And Wyoming Fibers had a great tip about buying in bulk. If you're waiting for those sales from bigger yarn companies, then you can often save even more money by buying a larger quantity of yarn from that company. So I know like Knit Picks, they have some where you can buy, especially if you're buying like the bare yarns that you plan to dye, you can buy larger bundles of yarn like that. And I think they have kits too of like various yarns that you can buy in larger quantities. And it doesn't hurt to call and ask some of these yarn companies if you know you're going to buy quite a lot. Like, I'm not sure how many skeins would be considered a bulk order, but it's worth checking out to see if you can save even more money. If you're saving up and purchasing during a sale and then also buying quite a large amount, then you can save more money that way as well. Another way to save some money is to get together with some knitting friends, and maybe if you all have like a stash, you could sort through your stash and get rid of the things that you know, choose the things you know you're not going to use or knit, and then everybody can do like a swap or something like that, or a sort of stash dive in your friends' collection. I don't have any knitting friends that live locally. I have some friends who knit, but it's more like they might do one project a year. They don't do lots of knitting. Like if you're probably sitting here watching this, then you're a knitter with a capital K. You probably have some yarn stashed away and you probably have a couple projects on your needles, or you're always knitting. Then you might have a stash, and hopefully you've got some friends who might have a little stash, and you could always stash dive in each other's stashes. I feel like I've said the word stash a lot right there. Then that's something to check out. I mean, it would be nice to have some knitting friends locally. That would be really nice. But I do have a few friends who do knit. Just my mother-in-law is the one who said she knits, but she said, you're a knitter with a capital K. So now I laughed, but it does kind of, I guess that fits. I mean, there's a lot of people who can knit, but they don't knit all the time like people who probably are sitting here watching YouTube videos about knitting and have books and patterns and piles of yarn projects and knitting projects laying around, then there is a difference, I guess, between people who can knit and knitters with a capital K. Okay, we still have more comments to share, lots of great tips, but if you're finding this valuable or useful, or you just want to help me out, I would love it if you'd give this video a thumbs up so more knitters can find it and find some tips for saving money. And if you have a tip that we haven't covered, then I would love to hear about it. So leave a comment and share your money-saving knitting tips with us, and let's get to the second half of this. Marianne had a fabulous comment with some money-saving tips. She talks about using the library, which is a really great way to check out knitting books, books of patterns or technique books, anything like that. I use my library a lot if I'm doing research on a specific topic, or if there's a brand new book that I would like to have, then I can fill out a form on my library's website, and they might purchase it, and then I can get on the waiting list and get a peek at that book, which is nice before I buy a book, because sometimes, books are not really that cheap and they take up space on my shelf, so I want to have books on my shelf that I know I'm going to use and reference. So if I can look at it first, like getting it from the library, then that's a great way to check it out first. And it's a great way to get patterns as well. You can, especially if you knit fast, you can get the book from the library and probably have the whole item knitted before the book has to go back to the library, or perhaps you can renew it. So that's a great way. And she also mentions craftsy classes through her library, and I have to look that up to see if my library will do that. I know my library has like different ebook apps and different like language courses, so it would be great to see if they have a craftsy membership they can access right through your library. So that is definitely worth checking out, because craftsy classes are awesome. They're a great way to learn new techniques or try new projects. And of course, you can get the yearly membership that usually goes on sale a few times a year for very little money. But hey, free is even better. So if you can check your local library's website and see if you have access to Craftsy or any other platforms like that where you can learn knitting things. So I really love that tip. I need to check my library. I've had a Craftsy membership in the past, but I don't have it this year. And so I think I'm going to have to check my library and see if I can get free access. That would be really nice. And Marianne also mentions unraveling sweaters from the thrift store as well, which we have talked about already. So that's definitely something to consider. I did a video last week. I'll put it here, or the link down below, where I actually took a sweater apart. To knit the sweater I'm working on now, I reclaimed the yarn. It was a sweater I had already hand knit, so that was easier to figure out. But it is possible to take apart machine knit sweaters as well. You just have to look at the seams, because there's two different ways they can be constructed. They can be like bolts of knitted fabric, and then they cut out the pieces and sew them together, and that's not going to be good for reclaiming the yarn, because if it's cut and sewn, every row is going to be just a single strand of yarn. It won't be connected to the row above or below. So what you want to look for are the ones that were made on a knitting machine and then they were sewn together. That's very similar to what we do as hand knitters, where we knit the pieces and sew them together. Those kind you can definitely take apart. And the way to tell is by looking at the seams. Like if they've been like overlocked on a serger, then that's been cut and then sewn up. So that's no good. Or you can tell, like if it just look at the edges and see if it looks like they've been cut, or if it looks like a whole stitch on that seam. You'll be able to tell right away when you find one. It'll look like there's a little crochet seam running down the side, and it'll have like a whole 2 stitches where the material has been sewn together, and it'll be like a complete stitch on the inside along that seam, and it won't look like it's been cut. So you just look for sweaters like that, and then you start picking apart the seams along the sides and then along the shoulders, and you'll get all of the pieces separated. And then I usually start like I usually don't mind losing some yarn, so I will sort of just like cut off the bind off, which is usually going to be at the shoulders. If it was a machine knit sweater in pieces, it was knit from the bottom to the top. So wherever it was bound off is where you start unraveling. So I just sort of cut that part. I should make a video about this, I think. I'll go to the secondhand store and show you what to look for and then how to take it apart. Now, the first time I did it, I did not have a ball winder or a Swift, so I was doing it by hand, and it took a long time. Especially, I had like that fingering weight cashmere sweater, and oh, that was a lot of yarn, but man, it took forever to unravel it. I put the bread hook on my stand mixer, and I attached the yarn to that, and I let the stand mixer do the work for me after a certain point because I was so tired of unraveling. And it worked. I mean, it worked out okay. I can't say I'd recommend that. I would say get a ball winder. You can usually get them not that expensively, and it's worth it to attach the yarn to that and let the ball winder do the work for you. And then of course you have to put it into a hank so you can give it a good wash, because especially if it's come from the secondhand store, then the yarn is probably dusty and there's lots of bits of stuff in there and fluff, and you want to just wash it all up before you have to sit and knit with it. But it's definitely something to do and look for. I like to look for nice fibers like cashmere, 100% wool. Those are really nice. I usually avoid like the 100% cotton because I don't enjoy, I don't know, they feel too rough, and I just don't. Maybe if I found a really nice soft Pima cotton, then I would. But I've had good luck finding wool and some cashmere. I would avoid things that are super sticky like mohair or any sort of brushed fibers, because it's going to be really hard to pull them back apart. If you've ever knit with them, then you know if you make a mistake, it's hard to rip it back out because the fibers are so sticky. So I would avoid those, but solid colored sweaters. And I like to look in the men's section because of course they're bigger sweaters, so you'll get more yarn too. But anyway, let's get back to your tips. The next tip is awesome about finding a blank canvas pattern. This is just a great way to save money. If you find something that has a wide range of sizes, really great structure, then you know that you're going to knit that more than once because you can add color work or stitch patterns to it. Then that's a great way to save money. And I have a book that I recommend for that, Amy Herzog's Ultimate Sweater Book. It's got like all of the classic shapes, like the raglan, the satin sleeve, the yoke sweater, the drop shoulder, and I think 12 different sizes, and then each one is also in 3 different yarn weights. So it's what I would call it's those blank canvas patterns, and you can add elements to it. You could add stitch patterns, you can add color. The cardigan right here, actually, that I still haven't put the buttons on, it's been sitting there for a while, was one of her basic patterns, and I added a shawl collar to it. I'm going to add some pockets to it, but it's definitely those blank canvas patterns. So I'll link down below to that book because it's definitely worth checking out if you like to be a little adventurous and add design elements to your own projects. Then a blank canvas pattern is a great idea. Another one would be the Ann Budd books. She's got her handy book of patterns, and then the handy book of sweater patterns, and then there's the handy book of top-down sweater patterns, and they're the same idea. They're in multiple gauges. She doesn't go by yarn weight so much as you would go by your own gauge. And I want to say all of them are from like children's sizes up through adult as well. So they are all definitely blank canvas patterns. And then you add all of the elements that you want to really make unique sweaters. So it's a great way to save money. With one book, you can knit all the sweaters you want for the rest of your life, as long as you don't mind adding your own stitch patterns or colors or adding different elements. Then that's a great way to do that and to save money. And knowing myself, like I hardly ever stick to a pattern. I'll buy them because I like the convenience of not having to sort out the numbers myself, but then I end up generally changing things about it anyway and then doing more work. So these blank canvas patterns are a great way to add those design touches that you know that you'd like to do for yourself. Then there was a great comment by Jane about investing in the best products you can afford, your needles especially. And I love her advice about checking your local yarn shop, because if they have like needles on display, you might be able to, not the ones that are for sale, but if they have some like on display with a little swatch, and you might be able to try them out before you buy them. I think that's a fabulous idea. Maybe something to even suggest at your local yarn shop if they don't do that already, because sets of knitting needles are really an investment, and you wouldn't want to invest all that money in a set that you find out that you really dislike, whether it's like the length of the needle or the taper or the material that it's made out of. It's a lot of money to invest and then find out you don't like it. So there's a way to try it out first before you invest. Then that is a good way to actually save money in the long run, because a good interchangeable set will really help you do almost all of your knitting. Like it's much more affordable in the long run than buying like the different fixed circulars and every needle size and then all the different needle lengths. Like a good interchangeable set is great for that. And I ended up getting the Chiaogoo. It's what I'm using right here. But I got the 4-inch tips, because then it also makes 16-inch circulars, so I can do hats as well. A lot of the sets have 5-inch tips, and then the cords aren't short enough to get that 16-inch length for hats. So, but that is another thing you'd want to test. A lot of people don't like the 4-inch tips. My hands are smaller, so I like them just fine. I find the 5-inch a bit long sometimes, though I use them. I have some in fixed circulars, but I prefer the 4-inch tips. So that's worth checking out as well, because you can get more needle sizes with 4-inch tips. And then of course the shorties as well. Like there's so many knitting needles to try, but I love her idea of checking your local yarn shop to see if you can test out the needles first before purchasing them. That's a really great tip. And then she also mentions checking out books from the library before you decide you want to own it. And then also buying used books off Amazon. I do that quite a lot. If I see a book I like on there, I'll check the marketplace to see if I can save even more money, or other secondhand online places. There's Abe Books and Book Depository. There's quite a few different marketplaces that you can use online, and especially if they're older knitting books, then you can probably find them very inexpensively that way. Then her last bit of advice about having a budget for your knitting is really a great. Wait until you can afford to buy it. Use what you have. You don't always need something new. It's really great advice. You don't need to buy everything brand new. I often look for books used to save a few dollars if possible. And I like to reclaim yarn. Like this yarn right here that I'm knitting was from another sweater that I knit last year, and I wore it for a while, decided I didn't want it anymore. So I can reclaim the yarn, use it again. There's no reason not to do that in most cases. So it's possible to really save money. And I like her advice about setting a budget for knitting too. Even if, of course, we're probably all on budgets for our families, but if we have like, a personal allowance or whatever, then you can save up, even if it's just a few dollars, save it up, and then you can splurge on those bigger purchases. Then Celeste also mentioned the Knitting Guild, and we've already talked about that a bit, about how it's a great thing to join. I mean, there's usually like monthly meetings, and there might be like discussion topics and things you can learn, but a lot of guilds have like a guild library where you can check out books from there, and you might even be able to try knitting needles or see yarn, see other people, what they're knitting, and make some knitting friends. And it's a really great time investment into your craft. When she also mentions that her guild has like a yearly garage sale, so she can save a lot more money that way as well. So it's definitely worth checking out your guild, in your local guild, to see. So, I mean, there's usually a membership fee involved, but with all of the ways that you can participate in the guild to learn and to save money with these different, like the books and the yard sales and things like that, then it's probably worth that yearly investment. Then Candy Kate also talked about getting good tools. It's better to invest in a nice set than have cheap tools that keep breaking. And I'm sure we've all been there where, well, I started like most when I wanted to learn how to knit. My sister-in-law was teaching me how, and she told me what to She just said go pick up some yarn and needles, and she was just going to teach me the basics. So I picked up some dishcloth yarn and a set of double pointed needles just from the local store here. And of course, after a few projects, I started buying some better needles, and right away you can really tell the difference. Like the materials are, it's night and day. Like when you have nice needles, it's so much nicer to knit with. Even if the yarn's not expensive, the needles make a difference when you're working on that project. So it's definitely worth it to invest in some good materials. So Sharon also mentions budgeting in her comment, and I think it's just really a fabulous way to save a little bit for those bigger things. Like you might not be able to, depending on your budget, you might not be able to splash out for these, hand-dyed yarns and sweater patterns every single month, but a lot of us can't do that anyway. So if you can save a few dollars in your family budget every few weeks or every month or so, and then you start making a little knitting nest egg. So when one of those special sales from the designer that you like or the yarn company that you love, then you've got some money set aside that you can use for that. But if you've got comments or tips about saving money on knitting, then please leave them down below. I would love to hear about them, and I'm sure anybody else that's watching this would love to find more tips and would love to hear about your tips. And if you're looking for more advice, I have a short playlist that's all about knitting on a budget. It's got videos about inexpensive yarns for sock knitting and 100% wool yarn and more tips about budgeting. So you can click right there and watch that playlist, settle in with your knitting, and I'll see you in the next video.